So picture this. It's January 1969, and the Beatles are, well, they're the biggest thing on Earth, period. They're dominating the charts everywhere you look. But what if I told you that behind all that success, the whole thing was falling apart? We're going to dive deep into that one final, chaotic year that really spelled the end for this musical empire.
And the crazy thing is, it all kicked off with a project that was supposed to save them. The whole idea was to get back, get back to their roots, play raw, live music. But John Lennon himself called it a dreadful, dreadful feeling. So the very thing that was meant to be the glue holding them together, that became the hammer that smashed them to pieces.
All right, Section 1, the Get Back disaster, the winter of discontent. So this is where the first major crack really shows up. The Get Back sessions. I mean, on paper, it sounded perfect, right? A simple back-to-basics jam session, a return to what made them great, all leading up to their first live show in ages. But instead of that, they walk straight into an absolute perfect storm of tension.
And just look at how fast things went south. We're talking January 2nd, the sessions begin. By January 6th, that's 4 days. Paul and George are having this infamous argument, all caught on camera. Just 4 days after that, George Harrison literally quits the band. He's just gone. It took them almost a week of begging and pleading just to get him back in the door. And even then, the damage was already done. The dream was a total nightmare.
And you've got to understand, he didn't just quietly slip out the back door. His parting shot was absolutely brutal. See around the clubs, put an ad in the NME. I mean, the NME was the music paper in the UK. That's not just taking a break. That's a man pushed to his absolute limit, feeling so ignored that he's ready to just walk away from being a Beatle.
So what was going on? Well, it was a mess of different problems all at once. You had Paul, who was trying so hard to keep the ship from sinking that he came across as this overbearing band leader. Then there's John, who was, let's be honest, he was totally checked out. He was deep into his relationship with Yoko, struggling with heroin, and just wasn't interested in being a Beatle anymore. And for George, he's showing up with these incredible songs, stuff like All Things Must Pass, and they're basically just ignoring him. Then you throw Yoko's constant presence into that mix, and that old four lads dynamic, it just shattered.
Okay, so as if all that creative drama wasn't enough, there was this other huge problem looming over them: money. A lot of money. Or, more accurately, the lack of it. Their big, idealistic company, Apple Corps, wasn't just losing money, it was hemorrhaging it. It was about to completely implode. See, Apple Corps was supposed to be this incredible, almost utopian idea, like a kind of Western communism for artists. You had a dream, they'd give you the money. Beautiful, right? But in reality, without their manager Brian Epstein to guide them, it was just chaos. There was zero structure. John Lennon nailed it when he said it was like playing Monopoly with real money. They were just handing out cash to anyone who walked in the door, and the whole thing was a financial black hole.
And here's the number, the final bill. £1.5 million, lost in just 18 months. Now, to give you some idea of what that means, today, that's over £30 million. An accountant literally sat them down and said, if you keep this up, you'll all be broke in 6 months. Can you imagine? The Beatles, the biggest band in the world, on the verge of bankruptcy.
And this wasn't just some distant corporate problem, Look at these numbers. This was personal. Every single one of them was massively overdrawn on their accounts with Apple. John alone owed the company £64,000. That's nearly £1 million in today's money. This was a full-blown financial crisis, and it was hitting each of them right where they lived.
So, okay, they're panicking, they're losing all their money, and that panic creates this huge power vacuum. They desperately need a manager to come in and fix things. And that need, it's what sparks the final, brutal battle for control. A fight that would literally split the band in two.
And it really came down to two camps. In one corner, you've got Allen Klein, the shark. He's the aggressive, street-smart guy who manages the Rolling Stones. He talks tough, promises to get them their money, and John, George, and Ringo, they love him. And in the other corner, you have the family. That's Lee and John Eastman, Paul's very proper Park Avenue lawyer, father-in-law, and brother-in-law. It couldn't be more different. And for the very first time, the battle lines were drawn. It was 3 Beatles against Paul.
You have to admit, Klein's pitch was genius. He knew exactly what buttons to push. He went straight to John and told him everything he'd been wanting to hear, that he was the real leader, not just playing second fiddle to Paul. He lavished attention on Yoko, treated her like an artist. He even bonded with John over their rough upbringings. And then the killer blow. He revealed that Paul had been secretly buying up more shares in their company. After that, Klein didn't just have John on his side, he owned him.
So Paul tries this one last desperate move. He gets Mick Jagger, who was also managed by Klein, to come down to Apple headquarters and warn the others. But get this, when Mick walks in, who's sitting there was John, George, and Ringo? Allen Klein himself. It was a total ambush set up by John. Jagger just crumbled under the pressure and gives a super weak, non-committal warning. He's all right if you like that sort of thing. And that was it. That was the final nail in the coffin. Klein had won.
But then, in the middle of all this chaos, the arguments, the money problems, the backstabbing, something absolutely magical happens. For just 42 minutes, they somehow managed to put all of it aside, and they became the Beatles again. They reminded everyone, and maybe even themselves, of just how incredible they could be.
So really, this was the big question hanging in the air, right? After weeks of all this fighting, after George actually quit, could they still do it? Could they plug in and find that spark, that magic that made them who they were? Well, their very last public performance, up on the roof of their own building, was going to be the ultimate answer.
And the way this whole thing came together is just insane. It was pure, beautiful chaos. They had to get builders in to reinforce the roof with steel beams so it wouldn't literally collapse on the accountants below. At one point, they sent an engineer to a department store to buy women's pantyhose, to stretch over the microphones to stop the wind noise. It was all thrown together at the last second, but man, when they finally started to play, it was absolutely electric.
And of course, eventually the police show up and shut the whole thing down. And that's when John Lennon walks up to the mic and delivers one of the greatest, most perfect lines in the history of rock and roll. I'd like to say thanks on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we pass the audition. Just perfect. For that one brief moment, they weren't a broken business partnership, they were a gang again.
But it was just a moment. That amazing feeling of unity on the roof, it didn't last. The adrenaline faded, and the cold, hard reality of all their problems came rushing right back. That rooftop magic, as amazing as it was, couldn't heal the deep cracks that had already formed.
I mean, look at this. This one slide tells you everything you need to know about where they were at. March 12, 1969. On that day, Paul McCartney gets married to Linda Eastman, and not one of the other Beatles is there. Not one. Then, that same night, while Paul is celebrating his wedding, George Harrison's house is being raided by the cops. They weren't just living separate lives anymore, they were in completely different worlds.
And that's really where the final battle lines were drawn for good. It wasn't about music anymore. You had Paul, now legally connected to the Eastmans, and you had John, George, and Ringo, all signed up with Allen Klein. They were two totally separate camps, locked in by contracts. The idea of them all getting in a room to make music together, it was basically impossible at that point.
Which kind of leads us to the big final question, doesn't it? When you look back at this incredibly painful, chaotic year, was it just the sad, tragic death of the greatest band of all time? Or was it something else? Was it the necessary, messy end that had to happen to give birth to four of the most incredible solo careers we've ever seen? Was it a rebirth, or was it a requiem? I'll let you be the judge of that.